Rain or shine, McLaren utterly dominated the Formula 1 season opener, but just how scared should its rivals be, and has the FIA just offered them a big glimmer of hope with a surprise rule change? A dominant 1-2 in qualifying for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri turned into victory in the rain-hit Australian Grand Prix, despite pressure from Max Verstappen both in the early stages and late on. It was an ominous start, with Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff describing the pace of the McLaren as just very strong. The question is, how strong? The McLaren is universally acclaimed as the best car of the early stages of 2025. It demonstrated a significant pace advantage both in qualifying and in race trim, regardless of the weather, and McLaren proved it has learned from last year's squandered opportunities by closing out victory. We're even at the point where there's excitement over an unexpected rule change for this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix, as people look for reasons why McLaren won't dominate this season. But more on that a little bit later. McLaren came into 2025 as the favourite, justified those expectations by flying during pre-season testing in Bahrain, then had an even bigger advantage than expected in Australia. That's led some in the F1 paddock to make some pretty bleak predictions about what McLaren's form means, not just for this year, but for 2026. Mercedes driver George Russell issued an ominous verdict after qualifying in Australia, warning that McLaren has such a big pace advantage it can already switch development fully to its 2026 car for the new regulations, and still win both titles this year. He likened it to the way Red Bull started last year in dominant fashion, but added that he doesn't expect McLaren to suffer the same mid-season slump that cost Red Bull the Constructors' title and left Verstappen vulnerable in the Drivers' Championship. Russell is adamant Red Bull wasn't overtaken in development terms last year, claiming if you've got a 6/10 advantage at the start of the year, nobody finds that in a single season. Instead, he put that down to unusual circumstances, like Red Bull introducing developments that didn't work, and mysteriously said some things were clarified that meant Red Bull went backwards. But McLaren this year, he argues, is in a prime position for now and the future. When Norris and Piastri really lent on the McLaren in both qualifying and the drier half of the race, they were miles faster than anybody. In qualifying, they had a near 4/10 advantage, and in the race, as the track dried and everybody's intermediates got worn and hot, the two McLarens were over a second faster than Verstappen's chasing Red Bull. It was a stark demonstration of McLaren's current superiority, only denied a 1-2 by Piastri's off. Yet Norris claimed after his victory that if the first race had been in Bahrain, he doesn't believe McLaren would have won. That hints that there are suspicions that Melbourne might have been right in McLaren's sweet spot, and gives the rest hope that it might be closer at other tracks. The McLaren MCL39 is clearly a quick car, there's no question about that, and a big clue about where its massive advantage came from in Australia can be found in Sector 3 during qualifying. In the crucial final runs in Q3 for example, the McLaren drivers were in a close fight with both Verstappen and Ferrari's Charles Leclerc right up until turn 11, but by the end of the lap, Norris had pumped in a lap time nearly 4/10 quicker than the fastest non-McLaren, with all but 2/100ths of that advantage acquired in the final sector. As George Russell said on Saturday, that points only to tyres. The fast turn 9-10 sweep that kicks off Sector 3 takes a lot out of the rubber, and the end of the lap can be painful as a result. The McLaren was working its tyres less hard there and across the lap, and therefore had more grip available for the run from turn 11 to the end of the lap. You might assume that this was superior tyre management from the drivers, but McLaren team principal Andrea Stella argued both Norris and Piastri were pushing hard throughout the lap. Russell pointed out that the McLaren was also relatively gentle on its tyres last season, and that appears to have carried over onto its 2025 car. The mighty race pace of Norris in the Bahrain test had already hinted at that, and then we saw it again on Sunday in Australia. McLaren's gentle treatment of its tyres, particularly the rears for the final sector where there are 3 traction limited slow corners, seemed to come into its own here. While the McLaren tyre usage is clearly a strength for the car for race stints, it probably also helped it was qualifying in Australia, given the combination of the track configuration and the fact that the Pirelli C5 compound was the soft option. The scale of that advantage will therefore wax and wane depending on track configuration and tyre allocation.
This season, you're in the race, fully immersed in every Grand Prix, live. Create your custom race view from multiple feeds. Miss nothing with pristine 4K. Stream all this and more on up to 6 devices.
Mastering aero elasticity has been a key part of McLaren's rise to the top of F1. It's no coincidence that it was Rob Marshall who joined Norris on the podium in Melbourne. The former Red Bull man has been spearheading McLaren, pushing the limits of the FIA's flexing front and rear wing rules. McLaren's innovative mini DRS solution had to be outlawed after Piastri won in Azerbaijan last year, but that was only ever a small part of McLaren's flexing wing arsenal. All teams push the boundaries of the flexi wing rules, but no team has had greater success in doing so than McLaren, inevitably fueling plenty of competitive paranoia from its defeated rivals. The team's domination of F1 2025 so far will have only added to that paranoia, with rivals doing everything they can to get McLaren pegged back. So it's tempting to see the surprise immediate introduction of tighter flexi rear wing rules as the first chance for McLaren's early advantage to be cut. The FIA was closely monitoring the on-track deformations exhibited by the cars during the season opener Australia. Extra high-definition cameras were fitted to some cars to capture footage of the rear wings out on track during practice, with reference dot stickers attached to the cars to help the FIA's monitoring. The FIA's analysis concluded that even stricter rules were immediately needed to combat rear wing flexing, having already tightened up things at the end of last year. At the end of 2024, the rear wing slot gap, i.e. the distance between the main plane and the flap of the rear wing, was mandated to not vary by more than 2mm when a vertical load of 750 newtons is placed at either extremity. That 2mm range is now going to reduce to 0.5mm from the Chinese Grand Prix onwards. There will be an additional 1/4 millimeter allowance for China only, given teams were only told on the Monday morning after Australia, but it will be 0.5 millimeter thereafter. The FIA stressed that all cars tested in Australia, including Lando Norris's McLaren, passed the flexing test and were deemed legal under the old tests. That's not to say all cars would have met the new tests, but there's also nothing to suggest that the new tests will affect McLaren more than any other team, even if its suspicious rivals will hope it could be one blow to its sizable advantage. Rear wing flexing is by no means fundamental to McLaren's 2025 advantage, but the race understands rival teams have been lobbying the FIA to tighten up the tests because it suspects McLaren is finding a way around them. In fact, Red Bull technical director Pierre Vacher told the race during pre-season testing that Ferrari and McLaren are doing the mini DRS stuff still. Other teams even suggested that observation of Flover's paint of the rear wings of some cars has also hinted at unusual behaviour taking place in how the rear wings were flexing at speed. The advantage from doing so is significant, and you could hypothesise it could be one factor behind McLaren's mastery of the Pirelli rubber. The increased straight line speed it gives you would leave you able to run higher wing angles for more downforce in the corners, but that's only a theory. Don't forget there's also the planned tightening of the front wing flexing rules for the 9th race of the year, the Spanish Grand Prix, and that has the potential to shake up the order too. But McLaren's rivals are now about to get a sooner than expected test of whether McLaren's scarily big 2025 advantage is going to be in any way neutered. And even if the rule clampdown doesn't slow down McLaren, there's still an element of its car that might be a weakness and could give its rivals some hope. As Stella pointed out, Saturday in Melbourne was relatively still in terms of wind, with only a few gentle breezes. That, he argued, can be misleading. Which leads us on to the reasons why Norris talked down the potential of the car. Both McLaren drivers complained after qualifying about the car being difficult to extract a quick lap from. Piastri summed it up well when he said the car was quick, but it bites. That didn't stop McLaren from getting a 1-2 on the grid in Melbourne, although both drivers made errors that compromised their first Q3 runs. This was more of a concern in the Bahrain test, when Norris talked about rear-end instability. That's why Stella warned that McLaren could struggle more in less generous conditions. Australia proved that McLaren is fundamentally a quick car, but there remain question marks about whether it could hit trouble in trickier conditions. That, combined with the natural inclination of any team leading the way to downplay their advantage, explains why there's still an air of caution around McLaren despite its mighty start. However, given how quick the McLaren was there in testing, and the fact that every team suffered in the worst of conditions in Bahrain, there's every chance that it will still be in very good shape come next month's race at the Sakir circuit. That's if its advantage isn't curtailed before then by the FIA's unexpected rule change.